Okay, what if Eminem wrote a song about Kim Stanley Robinson? Because he has both the names of the fictional characters in Eminem songs. So he'd be like, "Dear Kim, I'm gonna kill you. You're in the trunk of my car. Dear Eminem, this is Stan. I love you." Pretty cool,
Will
right?
you kill me?
But then
And what if
it's also green though. So it's like, "Dear Kim, you're in the trunk of my moon rover that runs entirely on the solar power. I'm gonna kill you, bitch."
how about this? What if Kim Stanley Robinson wrote a book about Halley's Comet?
Is Haley
Oh.
the name of Eminem's daughter, right?
Well, but the thing is, it can't just be Haley's Comet. It also has to be like Kim writing about the comet and being like, "Isn't it like Eminem's daughter? It's beautiful and rare, like Haley Mathers."
Haley's
Right, in the
Comet, I
future.
love you. I'm just gonna stop doing drugs.
In the future, she's going to wind up as a scientist who's going to have to protect us from Halley's Comet, or I guess she will lead a cohort.
What do you think Haley's Comet is going to do to us exactly?
Well, it's going to bypass Earth, and I bet a bunch of Earthlings, humans, will try to get on it, intercept it, and take control of it, and then fly it somewhere else and create their own society.
That's what the Heaven's Gate cult was with the Hale-Bopp
Yeah.
comet. That's why
Halley's Gate.
Haley's Gate. Yeah, I like it.
Haley's Gate.
Yeah.
That's right.
Have you seen a picture of her? Because she looks just like Eminem. It's uncanny.
Whoa, that's weird.
I'm looking it up right now. This is our first episode, folks. It's Hallie. Oh, no, it's Haley. Okay, it's spelled, looks kind of like Hallie, but it is Haley.
Yeah.
She is 25 now. Jesus Christ. She graduated high school in 2014.
Whoa.
She's a Spartan.
They grow up
Michigan
so
State.
fast.
That's weird to think
Eminem's
about.
daughter.
But this is our first episode under the Biden presidency. Things feel different. I feel the soul. I feel science. Did you feel that? The president who believes in science hitting you right in the fucking membrane?
Yeah. The soul
I
of the
feel like
nation
reaching
has been
across the
restored.
aisle.
Giving someone a reach around. That's what I feel like doing.
Yeah. Did you
reaching
see
to the other side of the podcast?
all the libs on Twitter yesterday who were like, "Finally, I can have sex again"?
I didn't know that was a rule, but that would be really tough if that was like a presidential rule. You can't.
I think
You can't nut.
the implication was that they were just so overwhelmed by the Trump presidency that it was like two could fuck at a time like this, or like it was a turn off or something.
Who could fuck at a time like this?
I fucked all through the Trump presidency. I don't know about those people. That's crazy that you were like Trump cell or something.
The most sex I've ever had was during pumps. Was
during pumps.
Pumping was during Trump.
Trump's
The pump administration.
popular strip club in East Williamsburg, Trump's.
That's what's going to happen now. He's going to open a strip club in Florida.
He'd be great at it. He just needs to
Yeah.
get away from politics and get back into his wheelhouse with just shady businesses like that.
Right, this is what he wanted to do all along. This was a bit to promote his TV network that never happened. Maybe now it will, but it looks like he's starting a third party, which will serve as a tax shelter, I'm sure.
I think he's going to jail. You're going to jail, Mr. Trump.
We'll see. I think he's going to find his way out of it. He's still a member of the Billionaires Club, you know.
The Billionaire Boys Club.
Yes.
You guys know those shirts? It's about Donald Trump.
Yeah. The Patriot Party, which is the party that he's talking about starting, there already was a group called the Patriot Party. I don't think they were a political party, but they were like a fucking like Black Panther anti-fascist thing in the 60s. Like some group like that, which people have pointed out in a very epic own of the Trump that he's Antifa now.
Maybe he'll make the transition. He'll be like, folks, it feels like the 60s again. We need to ally with the Black Panther Party. Let's do it.
Orange block. Everyone wear orange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, though, Trump is going to make the distinction, to be clear. The Patriots Party is not a reference to that party. It's a reference to the immortal New England Patriots with close personal friend Tom Brady.
Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Right. Yeah.
Actually,
His
Although
beautiful
now
wife, Giselle.
they're the Buccaneers. He's going to be near Tom Brady now. He's going back to Florida. He's going to be able to hang out with Tommy B.
If I was a fly on a wall in that room, let me in there.
I'm gonna start
Let me hang out with Tom.
I'm gonna start the Detroit Lions party, if that's what we're doing, because they lose all the time.
Did you see their new coach today?
No, I don't know anything about football. I just know they lose.
You're the only one who follows football, Anders.
Well, this has been trending on Twitter because he's insane. He was talking about. I'll send the link. He's crazy.
Cool.
He's talking about killing people and beating people up, and it's great.
Oh, that rules. I love that would be a scary football team to go up against. Like, they're helmed by an insane man. He broke out of the asylum, and now he manages a football team or coaches them or whatever.
The Baron of a deserted town with nothing to lose.
Yeah, we talked about Detroit in the interview, actually.
We did.
We did. As you could tell from the intro, today we're talking about the police and how to fix them.
Listen, man, I'm very hungover because of celebrating Joe Biden's presidency last night.
That wild Anog.
Yeah.
We were all turning up for the Anog. Thanks for coming to the stream. For the 50 of you who showed up to that.
It was nuts. I had half a hard seltzer.
I made a bowl of what's called swamp water, which is a punch you make out of a liquor called chartreuse that's green. And me and my roommate split it, and I'm real hungover from it. I watched Revenge of the Sith and Wishmaster 3. It was a pretty wild night.
Nice.
The way it was intended to be viewed on that swamp water.
Yeah, drunk on swamp water, watching the third prequel, and I have to say, I'm a true millennial now. I believe I'm team struggle session on the prequels. They make more sense as movies than the fucking new Star Wars movies, and I was pretty trashed.
Oh, then the new ones who are coming now. Okay, I thought you were comparing to the original.
No, I'm not that crazy. That's a contrarian psycho if you meet somebody who's like, the prequels are better than The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
I genuinely enjoyed episode 3, and I wasn't even on that swamp water.
It's great. It's they figured it out by the third movie, and it makes the whole thing come together because you have you realize, the Republic was the Republic, and then it turned into Empire, and that's why there's a new Republic, but it turned into it because of this split.
Could you imagine a republic that turns into an empire?
No, I'm saying it actually makes sense if you read history and stuff, and they made an apt metaphor for liberal democracy turning into empire, and then there being rebels and shit like that.
Look, you're not gonna like this, but George Lucas is a leftist. He's a comrade. You have to support his products.
He considers himself one. I don't know if we would consider him one, but he did have a ranch that I think there's some zoning issue.
Right.
Where
he let the Zapatistas train on his ranch.
Basically, he turned it into low income housing.
Is that true?
Yeah. So I guess he's still a landlord, but and then he also made Red Tails, which he produced it himself because no one would produce it, which doesn't necessarily make him a leftist either. But he considers himself one. He was calling himself a 99%er during Occupy. I mean, I always the graphics. I don't like the graphics for either of the new Star Wars trilogies because it's that's just going to get old one day, right? We're experimenting with new graphic technology or whatever. It's just going to look like an old video game in a matter of years. The originals, the episodes, 4, 5, and 6, they used actual models, like little spaceships.
The originals also look old. They redid
I think they look more
2000s.
realistic. I think they look better than new stuff. You can spruce them up with some 3D imagery, but the fact that there's fucking actual models that they're filming in real time, I think, is just so much better.
What you're referring to is known as practical effects, which I think actually, I agree that they're actually cinema peaked at practical effects, and then this insane thing happened where they were like, oh, we can save money and it technically looks better with CGI or whatever. But like all the great horror films, like fucking slashers and stuff, practical effects, everyone loved that shit from growing up because it's like, I don't know, it just looks to your eyeball like something you could actually reach out and touch and interact with, and not like a fucking screensaver or whatever.
Right.
I think you two, you're resisting history. You're resisting the path of technology. We need to embrace Boss Nass and his beautiful digital neck with all the folds that look so real but so far away at the same time.
I have a question that might be relevant to our interview today. Are there cops in Star Wars, technically? Do they have a police problem? Are the stormtroopers
It's fully integrated.
cops, or are they just the military?
Yeah, well, the stormtroopers, I think, also serve as cops. They're the whole security apparatus on the Empire's, like, regions that it controls.
Okay.
Comrade George, you've done it again.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if the rebels really need policing. I don't think they do. I think they're self-governing.
Yeah, the rebels they're like the model for George Lucas is good. It's just that everyone's so mad at him about those first couple of movies with the pod racing and the Sebulba and shit that no one can see that he has good politics.
Yeah.
Bulba is communist. You have to defend him. He's cool. He has too many arms.
The pod racing is great. The rest of it I wasn't, in love with. But again, you got to compare it to. It's hard to top those 4, 5,
The
6.
Asian robot empire, that was actually good. Defend George Lucas.
Yeah. Stormtroopers, it's the job, it's not the individuals, it's not a few bad apples. There's no hero stormtroopers.
Which does come up in this interview. This is actually a really good segue to our interview.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Think about stormtroopers the whole time and it'll make sense,
Yeah, this is like Pink Floyd. You gotta just like play the movie backwards and it syncs up with our podcast.
All right. Who are we talking to today, Alex?
Today we're talking to Alex Vitale.
I'm sorry, did you book another Alex?
That's how he booked.
I booked another Alex because I don't think we've had enough Alexes on, and I want more perspectives from people of that demographic.
All right. We need an Anders.
We're going to talk about the police, and we're going to talk about the politics, and if you just take this extra step, it's also kind of about Star Wars if you think about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Drinking
this whole movement is a metaphor for Star Wars. We don't even realize it.
Drink an entire bottle of chartreuse and watch Star Wars and it'll make sense. You don't need to read The End of Policing if you do that instead. That's actually a cheat sheet that I came up with.
Absolutely. So I think we're ready to cut to that now, and let's play the tape.
Boom shakalaka.
Boom shakalaka.
Lock them into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
We are now live on the radio with Professor of Sociology at Brooklyn College and author of The End of Policing, Alex Vitale. Thanks for coming on the show.
You bet, guys.
That's Bernie's alma mater. Brooklyn College.
Once upon a time.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You ever see him there?
You shoot basketballs
He made a
with them?
campaign appearance there, a huge campaign appearance there, but I wasn't able to attend.
I think we were there, right? Was it all three of us or just you and me, Lex?
We were invited instead of Alex.
Yeah.
I didn't want to bring it up.
I wasn't there. I've never seen
Okay.
Bernie Sanders in real life. I'm not convinced he's real.
Really hot.
Yeah.
Hot guy.
Doesn't
The
capture his...
You
mittens.
gotta
It's the
see it.
mittens.
Yeah. Do you know the story about those mittens? It's very sad. It's
What?
I can't remember. So the back when he was running for president a million years ago, right? He's wearing those mittens in some live event, and somebody retweets it with like a link to a story, and I don't remember the direct like pieces of this story, but it was very heartbreaking because essentially it was a Medicare for All story. Some woman whose friend or mom or husband died or some shit, like, made him mittens and was like, please wear these mittens, Bernie Sanders. And every time he's in public, he wears them and he doesn't, like, talk about it. He just is wearing this lady's mittens. It's like what do you call it? Not an homage. It's I don't know. It's a nice thing. It's very sad if you know the story.
Yeah.
And here I was assuming they were because his hands were cold.
No. Well, probably that too.
They're a dead woman's last wish.
Yeah, so something fucked up like that. They're cursed mittens.
Mittens just can't be mittens anymore in 2021. Everything has to be like an epic story that's all been leading up to now.
Yeah. Anyway.
I blame social media.
Yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with it, because even if something was sad before, you probably wouldn't get access to the narrative that quickly.
Social media is really out of hand. Like, this thing that happened yesterday where Bernie was memed for, like, sitting on a chair, that was kind of social media just taking a ball and rolling with it that didn't exist, in my opinion. Like, I don't think that was a particularly weird photograph, but people just went fucking crazy with, like, Bernie's sitting? Whoa, you know?
And now he's been criticized for not exercising emotional labor and looking happy.
That's right.
I love
which
that one.
a woman would not get away with, apparently.
It's misogyny.
That post made me happy. Theo Bernie, frowning for men. No, it's because we like him. It's because we haven't seen him in a while, and it's nice that he sits with his mittens, which apparently are very sad.
Well, we're not
I got
here.
the message. There's work to be done. Why am I sitting here?
Yeah, that's a good takeaway. Absolutely.
The way he sat said that.
Yeah.
The way he did it with his coat.
We need a body language expert.
I think it may
explain
be
that.
because if he was getting inaugurated, which I think, it's unavoidable for him to think about, he probably would have not done this whole pomp and circumstance thing. It would have been a low-key, like, 2-minute, all right, let's get this over with, swear me in on the Torah. That's it.
Well,
His inauguration is just about the mittens.
we're not.
I bet you're all wondering what these are about.
Some lady died. No, we're not here to talk about mittens. The gloves are off, folks. We're here to talk about the police. You like how I did that?
Yes, very nice segue.
We're not
Yes.
using kid gloves when talking about the police. They're a problem.
Right.
Alex is here as our police expert, and we do have some questions for him about the issue of the year, law enforcement. I wanted to start with a kind of a general one. In the seminal film Lethal Weapon, Officer Roger Murtaugh laments he is too old for this shit, as he is deployed repeatedly into deadly shootouts. What is the ideal age for a police officer, and why?
I'm glad we're getting right into the technical details here. Policing used to be something that people did right out of high school. And in New York and a lot of places, 20 years and done on a half pension. So it was a young man's game. At that time, it was mostly a man's game. Since then, they've put in place some educational or military requirements. And I once spoke to Ray Kelly, the former NYPD commissioner, about this. And he said it's really just about getting them to be a little older and a little bit more experienced. And they've increased the pension retirement age to 25 years of service. So they're getting a little bit older.
Right, that's going to affect your tackle.
Yeah.
Yeah, my full disclosure, I've mentioned on the show before, my grandfather was NYPD for a couple of yeah. I don't defend him, but he had literally no other choice. He was Irish, and he could not get hired anywhere else. So he did that for, I guess, 20 years, and then was LaGuardia customs guy. But it's interesting to me how ethnicized the profession used to be, and now they're sort of diversifying. What in your research have you learned about that, particularly the Irish, which I guess I'm biased, I want to learn more about, and when did that sort of start to diversify and become other ethnicities?
Well, police hiring used to be a political process. local ward bosses had control of the local police precinct, and they would give out policing jobs as political payback for people who worked for them. And so the police represented a certain kind of ethnic succession that followed from the local politics at the neighborhood level. With the implementation of civil service exams and stuff, that got less clear, it got murkier, but it was still largely the purview of white ethnics, who were usually the second generation and third generation from those waves of immigration around 1900. Today, policing is much more diverse. It's actually not that totally out of step with the population of the country as a whole. There are, imbalances in places or whatever. But Jennifer Kobina at Michigan State and I just published a piece this week about the fact that, diversifying police is not going to save us, that the research is pretty clear about this.
Right.
Yeah,
I read that article. I wanted to ask you, what's the problem with the Rainbow Coalition of heavily armed police?
Yeah. Well, the problem is that it assumes, the Rainbow Coalition approach assumes that the problem with policing is a failure of implementation. That if the police were just slightly more professional, slightly less biased, slightly more attuned to the community, that this would win over the community, that would restore trust in the police, and then the police could get back to arresting a lot of black people on low-level marijuana charges. And that's really the problem. It's not the implementation, it's the mission. Why are we using the police, black, brown, or other, to wage a war on drugs and a war on immigrants and a war on terror and a war on the poor and all the rest? And until we address that broad problem of gross over-policing, the attitude, bias, life experience of individual officers just doesn't turn out to be very meaningful.
You get into this in the article, and towards the end of it, after you address the flaws of fixing police departments by diversifying them, you talk about the structural issue police departments have because they're used as kind of a Band-Aid to patch over these larger political issues our country has, where there's huge swaths of homeless and people who have substance abuse problems and untreated mental health and people in the black market because of economic precarity. Now that we're moving into a new administration, do you think there's going to be some will to kind of a project to address these political concerns? Is that going to get the ball rolling on police defunding?
Well, that's what's needed, but I certainly don't see any sign of it. I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind here that there's a limit to what can be done at the federal level anyway. This is a local problem. Right? Policing is a local matter. And what we're talking about here has really been a local bipartisan dynamic rooted in austerity, which is these local officials have decided under the pressure of global competition that all they can do is subsidize the already most successful parts of the economy, whether it's Wall Street or Hollywood out in California, right? In hopes that they'll become so successful banking in certain places, high tech, out west, that it'll trickle down to the rest of us. And, no one wants to be Detroit. No one wants to see this kind of capital strike that Detroit experienced. So they're doing tax breaks for the rich and subsidizing downtown development deals and all the rest in hopes of stimulating economic activity. The problem is that this has produced profound inequality. It hasn't trickled down. It has created this wage polarization where we have, billionaires paying no taxes and people sleeping on the streets. And policing is being used by these local mayors to paper over this contradiction, but to put a lid on mass homelessness, to manage mass untreated mental health and substance abuse problems, to control black markets that people engage in because they can't get into the formal labor market. So policing is a facilitator of this strategy of austerity and growing inequality. And right now, I don't see local mayors ready to reject that fundamental politics. You see a city council member here or there, DSA, folks who are beginning to challenge this approach, to talk about participatory economics and broader economic development strategies and redistributing resources more equitably. But the mainstream of the Democratic Party is still committed to austerity politics backed up by intensive and invasive policing.
Right. So it kind of looks like the direction a lot of political momentum is moving in is kind of more patchworks, like more sensitivity trainings, diversity initiatives, that kind of thing. Do you think if these initiatives passed and there were more diversity initiatives and more sensitivity trainings, and then that didn't work, would that move the conversation forward, or is this entire back and forth just completely in the world of ideology?
No, I think that's where we are, right? The officers responsible for the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis had implicit bias training, de-escalation training, mindfulness training. We're wearing body cameras. We're a diverse group of officers. We're operating under a new use of force policy around sanctity of life. I mean, Minneapolis enacted all these reforms, and it just made no difference. And that's what people have seen and experienced across the country, is that, here in New York, after they killed Eric Garner, they did implicit bias training and body cameras and de-escalation training. And nobody who watched the NYPD this summer could possibly say that any of that made any difference.
Right.
Because it just didn't. And so that's why the new movement is about defunding the police, about taking away this role for policing rather than imagining we can fix them with a training program.
It's a systemic problem, and you really see the way that the liberal mind conceives of and portrays this stuff in the media being very individualistic. It's all, this is an aberration. A cop doing something bad is a cop doing their job bad. They don't see that the problem is their job is the bad, what they're supposed to do is the bad thing or whatever. And what's really funny about that to me is that you have this situation where you had police violence looked pretty bad. So, at some point we go, well, why don't we diversify the police? Now we have this diverse thing with its boot on your neck, and it's like not solving this problem at all. But with the sensitivity training, I just can't help imagine at some point I'm gonna get gunned down by some guy in like a SWAT gear suit up thing who's just like, I see you, I hear you. Like, he's not the point is like completely missed.
They beat the guy up who did the diversity trainings in San Francisco. He got beat up at one of the summer protests by the cops he had been giving implicit bias training to.
Jesus. That had to be incredibly cathartic for somebody.
Well,
revealing, if nothing else.
Minneapolis has been sort of in the news, I guess, over the past almost a year, with of course the George Floyd murder and the sort of quote unquote reforms that we've seen since. I know earlier this fall, several city council members were overheard at an event after they had promised to abolish, quote unquote, abolish the police force there. That they were saying, like, well, that just means we have to rename it. Like that, we don't really have to abolish it. We just need to come up with a new name. But it does seem like eventually there was some money that was reappropriated there. Can you fill us in on what's happened in Minneapolis? And is that has that been successful? Is that city moving in the right direction?
So Minneapolis is really like a work in progress. We don't know what's going to end up happening there. There were a lot of kind of dramatic statements made in the absence of a concrete plan, and a lot of backsliding. And just to go back to something Jake said about liberals, right? Part of the problem here is that liberals are really committed to this idea that, they can benefit from austerity. They don't have any choice. And they're also committed to this idea of the rule of law, and that police exist to enact the rule of law in a way that's just automatically beneficial to everyone. Right. This naive understanding of the nature of policing and the legal systems that they're enforcing. The good news is there's actually a new report that just came out that says it's called "The Demand Is Still Defund the Police," and it's at interruptingcriminalization.com, and they lay out the huge number of victories that have been won in the last year in dozens of cities around the country. There were big investments in alternatives to policing, and in some places, actual, significant cuts to police budgets. In places like Austin and Oakland and Durham, North Carolina, and unlikely places like Salt Lake City, Utah. This is not just about San Francisco and New York, which actually, New York, we didn't see any big wins in New York.
Right.
And I think in a way that it's instructive because the wins tended to happen in those cities where there had been clear abolitionist-oriented organizing going on for several years.
Yeah.
The cities where it only sort of emerged in that form this summer typically didn't really win anything. And that was the problem in New York, is that in New York, most of the organizing around policing had been procedural, change this policy, have more oversight of the police, throw a couple cops in jail, and that will fix the problem. And it was only at the beginning of this year that the big groups in New York working on this issue clearly articulated a defund the police analysis. And so they hadn't had a chance to do that grassroots community organizing that's going to be needed to really win these things. And Minneapolis is kind of in the middle of that. They've been doing the organizing. They made some progress. They're going big, and that's going to take time to be realized, I think.
Right. Well, New York is an interesting case, too, because, of course, you had de Blasio, who was elected on racial profiling as one of his key planks because of his son. And I guess we've seen sort of an end to stop and frisk, quote unquote, the official policy, which was overruled. And as soon as it overruled, de Blasio actually changed his position, which people forget. He was for stop and frisk before he was against it. But he hasn't really done anything, to my mind, that's been very significant. But the NYPD hates him, right? That's one of the sort of hazards that I think was important to consider. Is this sort of paramilitary organization in a city like New York that is the NYPD. It has its own, intelligence service. It's a massive, massive bureaucracy that can kill people. Is there even an opportunity to come up against them? Isn't that like there's security risks, it seems, at stake for a future mayor or city council or anything, any kind of movement that wants to take away their power? How do you even approach that in a city like New York where the police force is just so massively powerful?
Well, I don't think we should overstate the power of the institution itself. It is very powerful, and it does have its own security apparatus, obviously, and that is a threat both to our movements and to elected officials. But a lot of their power comes from the fact that they have allies outside of policing, that they don't just speak for themselves. They speak for corporate interests, who give money to the police foundation, and who lobby for their budgets with the city council. They speak on behalf of, conservative homeowners associations. They speak on behalf of conservative merchants groups. So they're at the center of an ideological nexus. And they are the kind of pole for deeply conservative politics in what are otherwise more progressive urban areas. So so when they are speaking, they're not just speaking for their own institutional interests. They're speaking for often the whole conservative movements in these cities. They are the center of that. And so part of what's needed is to peel off their allies, to isolate them, and to point out the toxic politics that's involved. And this includes their unions. Right? To say this is what these unions actually stand for. They're not just here to get another 2% on their pension, right? they're pushing bills to criminalize homeless people. They're pushing bills to increase bail. They're pushing bills to, turn gangs into, RICO cases, bring in federal prosecutors, right? So they're actively involved in this politics. And so this all needs to be made more clear out in the open, and to enact a political cost for elected officials who take their campaign contributions, who take their endorsements, and to say, you can't just say, oh, well, it's another labor union. Right. No, when you're taking that endorsement, you're embracing a whole set of extremist right-wing politics that go along with it. And you can't do that and be our friend anymore.
Yeah, and it's been exciting to see. We'll see, how it plays out. But the slate that has been endorsed by DSA on the New York City Council running for that includes a lot of people who are, I think all of them wanted to fund the NYPD, but we'll see how successful they are.
Yeah, there's a lot. And also I think about 50 of the candidates signed a pledge that they wouldn't accept any contributions or endorsements from the police and corrections unions. Mm-hmm. So across the city, that's becoming normative.
Right.
It's interesting the way the culture war conservative angle of supporting the police manifests. Like, I know you said you're in Brooklyn. Have you ever been to Melody Lanes in Sunset Park?
Yes.
Have you seen their
redesign? I hurt my shoulder there a couple of years ago, actually.
I didn't mean to bring up such trauma, but they had a very interesting redesign for their bowling logo, which used to, I think, just be a pin, and now is a Blue Lives Matter flag where the pin is a black outline.
Holy shit.
And it's still bowling themed, but kind of with like a menacing physical violence angle to it.
Wait, so the ball is blue and then the pin is a black person?
Oh, there is no ball. It's pretty much just an American flag with a bowling pin.
Okay.
You get the metaphor. They're about hitting somebody with something.
Yeah, well, this is typical of a kind of petty bourgeois, small business owner, deeply conservative politics, right? Who wants authoritarianism, basically, to keep them safe and protect their business. And this has got to be pointed out, that it's not okay to have that kind of symbolism and point of view. That when you're embracing that, what you're embracing is, racist police terror directed at the most vulnerable communities in our society.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's almost like a struggle session that needs to happen.
Well, and some businesses are suffering the repercussions of Blue Lives Matter flags and all the rest. That's a real thing that's happening.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Salt Lake City, and I feel like Utah has, I know a few years ago, they actually took a pretty bold stance on homelessness and started buying homeless people like apartments or renting them rooms.
A housing first approach. That's right. And they've also been very good on some school policing issues, and really looking at like community schools models where the school is a resource hub for families and the larger community. So there's a lot of interesting experimentation underway in Utah.
Yeah. And I think some of that must be because there's, it's a heavily Republican state, so they just don't have the liberal boogeyman, and so they're going to think about things maybe a little less ideologically. But I'm curious about the war on drugs, because that does seem like something that probably a majority of Americans now want to end. It's just kind of this phantom war that we're still fighting, that law enforcement is still fighting, even though most people think it's retrograde.
It's up there with our other real wars that people no longer support. But we
exactly, yeah. And we are seeing a legalization movement in some places. I think Cuomo just announced something. Unfortunately, it's looking like it'll not be, do what I think needs to happen, which is actually give a hand up to people who have been hurt by the war on drugs the most. But let's say we legalize drugs, right? So, because I think this sometimes gets a bit overemphasized, the war on drugs. There's still a lot of local ordinances and stuff that police forces use and local governments use to criminalize poverty. Is there a danger in just focusing on narcotics and not on sort of quote unquote quality of life ordinances too?
Yes, absolutely. So while the war on drugs has been a central tool for the over policing of vulnerable communities, they will come up with other tools if we don't change the broader politics. Yeah. So I think for one thing, that's why any scheme around drug decriminalization or legalization should be undertaken from a kind of racial justice framework, so that the process of winning it is also a process of rejecting these systems of social control, of racialized social control. But that also has to be linked to a broader agenda around, economic justice. So what are we doing around discrimination in housing and employment and the delivery of social services and a whole broader, racial and economic justice agenda? So policing is one part of that. It's an enabler of some of the worst aspects of our political economic system. But obviously, making a few changes to the legal code is not going to be enough.
You do a great job going into the details of this large front of change in your book, which you went over in the middle of last summer, talking about, the role that police play is often this big umbrella of public tasks that should be broken down into like 8 different jobs. It's kind of like 2 entire different approaches to the world, right? Which is, one is kind of like a punish and revenge ideology that you see represented in our conservative politics in America, and another is more of a progressive coalition building thing. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what we were looking at this week in the last few weeks with the Capitol riot.
Part of what's happened here is that this process of neoliberal austerity needs to frame social problems as being the result of individual and moral failure that will only respond to punitive interventions. Because the alternative would be that they would have to acknowledge that these problems are the result of market failures. Right. And that's what they don't want. They don't want interventions in markets, right? Neoliberalism. Right. They want deregulation and special perks for themselves. So people embracing these punitive authoritarian interventions are facilitating those market-centered worldviews. And the other approach is saying, no, we need human-centered systems that are focused on trying to care for people, to repair harms, to build people up. And that's really what's dividing us here. And we can see this, in all these different arenas.
The thing I wanted to ask you about is, I think it's probably related to that, so you have we've talked a little bit about the conservative point of view and ideology around supporting the police. Then you have this much weirder thing, in my opinion, which is the liberal point of view, which is, we've talked about, fueled by like, what else can you do? And this is just the way it is. And we need this rule of law and all this stuff. I guess something I've been kind of fixated on since the fallout of the Capitol riot is this Eugene Goodman guy, because what I feel like is happening is that there was a police officer who eventually, when everyone sifted through enough footage, they found a story that made for liberal, catnip or bait or whatever. It bubbled its way to the top of the media discourse next week, which is that there's an officer who's black, right? So you can't be like, this is a mean white guy cop, and he made some moves that were like looked kind of effectively like smart policing or whatever. And what we get out of this is a story where no one really knows why they're particularly celebrating this guy, but they're like, look, it can be done. There is a way to do policing that that is good and functions. And I guess to me, it struck me as particularly liberal because it was also like very individualistic. So a liberal kind of is going to look at police and go, well, some of these are very, very bad at the job and some of them are really good at the job. And let's move from there in terms of assessing how to fix the problems that are a result of the job. But like, what are we just going to hire a bunch of really, really good cops or look at what the job is itself, you know? What do you think about that? Because to me, it struck me as
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. This was a liberal defense of policing to try to restore their reputation, and so that's absolutely what was going on. Is trying to re-legitimate this idea that there is this thing that's good policing, and this guy is the embodiment of it. Of course, you know, that ignores the overall outcome of what happened, right? Many deaths, destruction, and profound political failure.
Right.
Yeah.
You can kind of see the absurdities and the logic of the individual argument there, because I mean, what's the end goal? I mean, the end step of a structural critique, and that's that we change the way the police functions. If the problem is just there aren't enough good cops, you just get into a Clone Wars style situation where you just take the really good one and find a way to spread their seed as many times as you can. And
That's what my grandfather was. We should, they just want to clone him. That's,
Django Fett, yeah.
That's the strategy.
Right, I'm doing a selfie with Django Fett.
It's the original one. Okay.
Well, I'm curious too about what you think about the Capitol, and you know, now there's sort of this discussion that yes, what happened was bad. Was it fascism? Was it not fascism? And what kind of ramifications does this have for the security state? Because you know, one of our last episodes was about the far right and how law enforcement bureaucracies really don't prioritize that much as so much as they do left-wing groups, even though the far right is far more dangerous. Do you see a problem though here arising with more funding, more laws being put on the books in the name of fighting far-right fascist groups that just go to feeding this bureaucracy that will end up hurting left-wing organizers?
You know, my first reaction to the Capitol events was that, you know, looking carefully at a bunch of the videos, was that this was not going to be explained by saying, oh, the officers just let them in. Right, that somehow this was a failure of some individual officers or groups of officers on the ground, and then that's the extent of the analysis we need. Because it was clear that this was a very violent crowd attacking them, injuring and killing officers, and in certain situations, officers got surrounded, and there was no point in like fighting over a barricade when they were, you know, protesters were filling in behind them, things like this. It's clear also that there was a huge failure at the top of these institutions. The sergeants at arms for the House and the Senate, you know, overrode a request to bring the National Guard in. There was either a misassessment of the risk or a willful failure to provide sufficient security. The mayor's office in D.C. sent a clear message that they wanted a softer touch, so there was a failure there in a sense. But really, this is all about a political failure, right? Mm-hmm. So the other mistake we don't want to make is to pivot to saying, well, let's blame the demonstrators through intensive criminalization.
Yeah.
Let's go and review all the videos and round them all up, and let's infiltrate their movements, enhance our surveillance powers, give the surveillance state, you know, more political policing powers, because we know that in the long run, those resources are going to get used against the left, not against the right. That's the long history of policing in the United States and everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
not even in the long run, right?
Like, yeah, and the short run, right? It's going to get used against Antifa and Black identity extremists and all the rest as our movements remain robust and threaten, you know, the Biden status quo. The real issue for me is who is really responsible for this toxic politics, right? If you're looking for accountability, let's go after the members of Congress, right, who enabled this nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Cori Bush in St. Louis put forward a bill, to do exactly that, to expel those members of Congress who were actively involved in fomenting the lies that have been building up this movement, but also who are the big money donors behind a lot of these, QAnon and militia YouTube stars?
Right.
Let's have an investigation of that. And how do those people benefit from ginning up all these conspiracy theories and right-wing extremist politics? There's a lot of billionaire money involved in this. And let's expose those people.
Yeah, for some reason that's like a bridge too far for people just kind of in the frame of mind that you get beaten into in this country. Looking into the dark money coctopus that caused this sort of shit to happen in the first place, impossible, right? But for some reason it's conceivable to like invoke the Sedition Act against a bunch of guys with like fucking football face paint on and shit who just went crazy. I think,
just to get YouTube followers,
right? Yeah, I mean, you're literally talking about invoking laws that were created to stop like socialists from protesting World War I. This is an insane precedent to set. There was a
the Sedition Act goes back to President Adams, but yes.
Right. We've talked about this in the show, but I don't remember everything.
Well played.
I wanted to ask you a questions, maybe a little bit less important, but since about police, I was a little curious because there's an officer that I'm obsessed with or a police chief that I'm obsessed with that he popped up for a second in all of this. Art Acevedo, now police chief of the HPD in Houston, used to be Austin when I lived there, made a big public showing of firing one of his officers who turned out to have participated in the Capitol insurrection. Do you know anything about him? He's full of fun trivia.
Oh, sure. We chat occasionally.
Oh, yeah? AV to AV, huh?
Yeah, well, I've been in the policing scholar space for decades, and also I'm from Houston.
Oh, me too.
He's always trying to get me to come and do ride-alongs and stuff whenever I'm down there, which I have not taken him up on.
Yeah, he loves those. He used to come to the comedy club and try to get comics to do that with him all the time, and we would be like, nice try.
Yeah, yeah. It's all about, policing as an institution is a legitimacy seeking organism. That's its nature.
Yeah.
Because it is so illegitimate. So it invests a huge amount of resources in trying to produce legitimacy for itself. And ride-alongs is one of the ways they do that. These things are highly orchestrated. I've been on many of them all around the world. So very familiar with that strategy. So Art is in the lead of this kind of reform movement, procedural reform movement within policing. And really, most big city chiefs share his general point of view. Some have more latitude to enact it than others. He has a police officers association that he has to deal with, but it's a strong chief system and he can do a lot, and he does a lot symbolically. And he's invested in this idea of better training and better procedures, and better officers will make for better policing. And so he's willing to point out bad policing. But it doesn't change anything. It doesn't actually change the policing, because in Houston, like the rest of the country, the police are in charge of everything, chasing down loose dogs, managing schools, and dealing with mental health problems, chasing homeless people around, and keeping a lid on the consequences of intense poverty. So as long as nothing changes on those dimensions, these kinds of superficial procedural reforms are not going to make any major difference.
I wanted to go back a second to the Capitol riot just for a little bit, because this has been on my mind. I read your interview with NPR, I think the day after it happened, or was that while it was happening?
pretty quickly after, yeah.
Were you on the ground for that? What was that?
I was just reviewing these videos as quick as I could. And, I had worked with the Code Switch team over the summer in trying to help figure out what defund the police meant. So when there was all this discourse about the failure of policing on the Capitol, they called me up and said, let's talk this through a little bit.
Right. So my question is in reference to something you say in the article and you brought up a few minutes ago, which is to view officers sympathizing with the protesters or letting them in as a individual failure is not helpful and not correct. And I agree with that. I think that's definitely true. But isn't there something to the fact that we know that far-right groups and white supremacist groups have been intentionally working their way into law enforcement for decades and seem like they're trying to use the institution as like a political strong arm to get what they want in politics? Like, isn't political affiliation part of the problem here?
So on the one, yeah, so both things are true. On the one hand, we know there are a lot of affinities within policing for these extremist views, whether it's QAnon stuff or 3%ers or, militias or just intense Trumpists. We have the head of the Sergeants Union here in New York doing television interviews with a QAnon mug showing on his bookcase, so we know there were police involved in the insurrection, and we know that there were police who were sympathetic to these views among the Capitol Police. But that does not explain what happened. It's not sufficient to explain what happened because the forces at work here are so much bigger than that. So does that mean we shouldn't be concerned about this? Yes, we should be concerned about it, but it's nothing new. Police were a huge part of the membership of the John Birch Society. Police were closely aligned with KKK groups, right? Police were part of anti-communist leagues historically. So there's nothing new about this. We need to rein in their power rather than imagining we're going to clean house. There's something about the job, right? Police are violence workers enacting a particular notion of order on society. And that comports with right-wing ideologies. And so policing is always going to be a fertile territory for this. And I don't think you're ever going to be able to engage in some ideological house cleaning that's going to fix this. Instead, we have to dial back their capacity to micromanage our lives.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know. You see these like hot takes flowing around the internet all the time where they're like, well, maybe the problem isn't racial diversity, but we need more Democrat cops. Will that fix the problem? Will you stop hurting me?
They are mostly Democrats. They are mostly Democrats, is my sense. Certainly in the big cities. For sure.
And you could definitely see that at the police protests when they're genuinely confused while you're there. The other question I had is right after the election, right? There was a kind of centrist Democratic media talking point that was flying around. And I don't know if this has been thoroughly debunked by now. I suspect we'll be seeing it again soon. But that the police abolition, defund the police line cost the party votes, and it's hurting the good liberals of this country. Do you think this is true? Do Americans just love the blue lives too much?
Well, so, this movement was not focused on the national race. No one thought we were going to be trying to set the ideological agenda for the Democratic Party in the 2020 election. We were focused, and I say we because I'm part of this movement and I'm on the ground working with folks across the country. And my sense was no one was trying to intervene at that level, really. People were focused on local budget battles, going to city council hearings and building up community support for these alternative ideas. It became a flashpoint in the election because of the intensity of the protests this summer. And the implications of that for the national election are, I think, unclear. While it obviously polled poorly in certain areas, there's also counter research that shows that it helped increased turnout in some urban areas because there was this level of political anger and mobilization that was a part of this movement, right? I mean, Philadelphia helped win the presidency for Biden. And those votes came from black neighborhoods. And that's true in Milwaukee and Detroit and some of these other swings, and Atlanta, right? So we don't know really what the effect was on the national election. And we weren't asking people to run on a defund the police platform.
Right. I mean, at least for me, it just seems like it's liberals allowing reactionaries to stage the conversation on a national level again and again, because of course Republicans are going to talk about race riots in the street and defending your cops because that's their beat. They need to look like the victims they can seize control.
Yeah.
Centrist Democrats are much more interested in neutralizing their left than neutralizing the Republicans. So they will always blame it all, everything they can, on the left.
Right.
It feels that way.
Yeah,
It is that way.
It's also the thing with we can't say defund the police. I meant to mention this in this episode where we talked about Lenin and what is to be done and all this stuff. But there's this thing that Lenin talks about called tailing, where there's sort of a tendency to, say that, well, we need to stay behind the will of the people rather than, shouldn't we be directly trying to influence and work with and push the line forward?
Yeah, but not through sloganeering.
Right.
I think in this sense, I am sympathetic to this idea that the solution to this is not getting everyone to say defund the police. The solution to this is to create a new political logic on the ground, which says that we should use the state to care for people, to lift people up, to empower communities, not to empower billionaires. And so, but to do that, we have to go into communities and talk to people about how to do that. What would that really look like? What would it mean to take a non-police centered approach to youth violence, to homelessness, to managing the problems around drug use and sex work? So we have real things to say about this, but we need the time and opportunity to lay it out for people. And that's what's going on. That's why this summer, no one was holding up a sign saying more money for police body cameras. They were holding up signs saying defund the police because this work is happening. And it is continuing to happen. And I think we're going to see a lot more victories in the year to come.
For sure. Okay, we're rounding out here. I guess if I was going to leave on one question just to ask you, big picture, what do you think is the largest structural barrier to getting this movement off the ground?
The fact that the big city Democratic mayors continue to be committed to austerity politics. And so they have an investment in undermining the movement because that movement threatens their downtown real estate deals and their tax breaks to contributors and all this stuff that's at the center of mainstream Democratic urban politics.
So the answer here is the same answer for climate change and everything else. You just got to scare your mayor.
It's always the damn
But we
mayors.
got to get rid of the liberals.
We got to get rid of the we're all on the same page here.
Yeah.
This is great. I think that wraps it up. Does anybody else have any more questions before we go?
I just want to say all mayors are bastards. New slogan.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. All right, and there's the episode title. So you got that. Alex Vitale, thanks for coming on. Where can our listeners find you?
I'm on, all the social media platforms. Twitter is a big one at A Vitale.
Cool.
All right, awesome.
All right, thank you for joining us.
That's it for another week, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
It's finished.
It's
all right.
finished.
That was fun.
Thanks for coming.